Hello, everyone, and welcome to Felix's Space Time. In today's video, we have an interview with Poppy Northcutt, the first female engineer in NASA's Mission Control. She's also an advocate for women's rights and civil rights. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy.
Same type, we're go, flight.
Okay, we're go.
We're go, same type, we're go.
Thank you so much for coming on here for an interview. For those who do not know you, can you tell everyone a bit about yourself?
Well, my name is Poppy Northcutt, and what I always tell people is I'm a one-time rocket scientist, a sometime lawyer, and a full-time women's rights activist. I worked in the Apollo program back in the 60s and early 70s, and was the first woman in mission control in an operational support role. My job then was to bring astronauts back to the Earth from the moon. I did trajectory work, the trajectories that were used to on every lunar mission to bring them back.
Brilliant. It's amazing to be able to talk to you today. You go by the name Poppy, yes?
Yes.
But your real name is Frances, is that right?
Yeah, that's the name of my birth certificate, but everybody calls me Poppy.
How did you get the nickname Poppy, and how did it stick with you?
Well, actually, my brother picked the name out, and he picked the name out before I was born. So that name has really been with me longer than the name Francis. He picked that name out because he was 6 years older than me, so he was 6 years old at the time, and his favorite little fairy tale book at the time was called Poppy the 4-Inch Fairy. So he named me after his favorite character.
Brilliant. When and how did you get interested in spaceflight?
Well, I wasn't really intending to go into that. At the time, the environment for women was very limited in terms of things that you could do. It never occurred to me that I could work on a lunar project when I was in college. Most women, if you went to college, you were expected to be a nurse or an executive secretary or a school teacher. But when I majored in mathematics, and I did take a course in celestial astronomy, celestial mechanics, actually. So I knew something about the subject, and you know, I had a few computer courses as well. So when I graduated, I was looking for a job, and I got a job offer at an aerospace company that was a contractor for NASA.
All right, okay, brilliant. So you were the first female engineer in NASA's Mission Control, calculating the trajectory for Apollo 8 to get from the moon back to Earth. What did this kind of job entail that you were doing? And was it quite daunting being the first female engineer? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to like and subscribe.
Well, by the time I was in Mission Control, I was used to being the only woman in the room in a technical role. So it was a daunting, I suppose, in a way it was, but actually I was pretty used to that environment by that time. The work that was done, some people, having seen the Hidden Figures, for example, think that we actually calculated things pulling out a pencil and paper or whatever. We did have high-speed computers. They weren't nearly as high-speed as the computers are today, but we did have computers at the time. And so, you know, what I worked on was the development of a computer program that was used in the real-time computer complex to calculate the trajectories that were used to bring the astronauts back to the Earth from the moon. The problem in doing that kind of a trajectory, it's called a three-body problem, and there's no closed form solution to it. You can't just take an equation and plug in, or a series of equations and plug in and get the answer, because there's too many variables. You know, the Earth is moving, and the sun is moving, and the moon is moving, and your spacecraft is moving. So everything is moving, and the real challenge of that is to figure out a way to optimize the answer so that you can reduce your fuel consumption. And at the same time, you can come in at the right entry angle when you get to the Earth, which is moving, and so you don't burn up in the atmosphere. And also, in case you need to, like in Apollo 13, you also want to minimize your flight time.
Oh, okay, brilliant. What did you do as when you were in your job as a computer? What did you have to do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, on a day-to-day basis, well, when I first started, I was a computerist. Okay, I wasn't a member of the technical staff when I first started. So on a day-to-day basis, a lot of times I was just running a lot of numbers. I was crunching a lot of numbers. We had a computer in our facility, but at that time, computers were vastly different than they are today, in that the interface was much slower and clumsier. You had to, in most instances, you had cards. You had to fill out these green sheets, and then they key punch the cards, and then they batch process to your computer stuff. So you didn't get instant turnaround by any stretch of the imagination. So a computerist did a lot of on-the-spot calculations to assist engineers in doing the analysis and trying to figure out how to optimize things. So, I number crunched a lot of times. Also, we did a lot of graphing. Today, if you want to graph, the computer does the graphing for you. It just takes your data and spits out a graph in a flash. In those days, you wanted a graph, you wanted visual displays. You had to take pen in hand and graph paper and put the dots on it.
Oh, okay. When you were doing this job, did you face a lot of sexism at NASA? And because like there was.
Well, there was a lot of sexism in the culture as a whole. I don't think there was more at NASA in particular than there was in the culture as a whole. Perhaps a little bit more because NASA at that time was very influenced by the military culture. And of course, there was a lot of discrimination against women in the military culture. But I worked for a contractor, and the contractor that I worked for was much more progressive, probably than most of the contractors at the time, and more progressive, quite frankly, than NASA was. So in my day-to-day environment, yes, there was discrimination, but it wasn't nearly as acute as it was in some places. I was lucky, and I worked really hard too, but I had, the head of Houston operations really went to bat for me to get me promoted. And that took a lot of effort on his part because the pay differential to go from being a computerist to a member of the technical staff was so great. He had to get permission many levels up. And that was one of the problems for women. If you start out experiencing discrimination and are underpaid, it's very hard to catch up because your prior salary tends to be used as the basis for your future salary.
Oh, okay. Do you remember quite vividly what you were doing on Apollo 8 and the Apollo 13 missions? And was one harder than the other? And how did they compare?
Well, they're very different situations. Okay, first of all, I think that Apollo 8, in terms of just its planning from the get-go, was probably the most challenging mission that was flown during Apollo. And the reason it was the most challenging in terms of just the basic mission itself was because there were so many new systems that were flying for the very, very first time. New hardware, software. It's a big leap to go from Earth orbit to go to the moon. Even if you don't land, just going to the moon is a very, very big leap. And there, because there were all of these unknowns, and also because it was the first time I worked in the control center itself, that to me is the most memorable mission. Now, Apollo 13, of course, represented the challenge and showed that the control people, the people in the control room, really could step up to the plate and solve right then and there pretty disastrous situations, and come up with a plan and work through it and deliver on it, and get those astronauts back safely to the Earth. The challenge that the people, the return to Earth people faced, the team that I was on, was actually pretty minimal, and that always seems surprising to people. But the truth of the matter is, the program that I worked on was initially called the Abort Program. That was what it was designed for, okay? It was designed to handle abort situations. Not necessarily designed to optimize situations rapidly and that came up, okay? So they ended up using that program all of the time for planned maneuvers as well as in the emergency situation. So Apollo 13 was really the first time the abort program, or they later called it the Return to Earth program, but that was the first time it was actually used for its first and most important function. And that was to be able to do an abort. Our program worked the way it was supposed to work. It did what it was supposed to do. The real challenge for Apollo 13 ended up being more environmental problems about oxygen, temperatures, things like that on the spacecraft. And those people were, they were back in the back rooms, trying to figure it out, trying to rig together this, that, or the other to try to get the oxygen situation worked out, and coming up with solutions to the environmental problems, because it was they were getting uncomfortably hot.
All right, okay. When did you start being actively being an advocate for women's rights and civil rights?
Well, actually, while I was still working on the space program, I got a lot of attention because I was the first woman in mission control. And also, I think at that time that the women's rights movement in the United States was really taking off, and there was a lot of attention to that as well. So in the course of that, I became increasingly aware of the discrimination that women faced, and I also felt like I had a responsibility. I was in a position where I could speak out, and I didn't have to worry about adverse consequences. I worked for, as I said, a progressive company. I wasn't sitting around worrying that if I said something, I was going to get fired. So I felt like I had an obligation to speak out and to, take what would be risky steps for other women that were not as well compensated, not in as a protected situation as I was. So I joined the National Organization for Women. I became a board member of that organization, and from then on, I have always been involved in doing things to try to advance the status of women.
Right, okay. What are you currently doing kind of on a day-to-day basis to do with civil rights and women's rights?
Well, this morning, we delayed our interview by about an hour because I was called to court. Okay, I'm a lawyer. I was called to court, and I represent pregnant teenage girls who want to get an abortion without involving their parents. And to do that, I have to go to court and get a judge to make a finding that they're mature enough to make the decision on their own, or that it's in their best interest to not involve the parents, usually because of some history of sexual or emotional or physical abuse. So I was called to court late yesterday afternoon, and my court was this morning, but I got the message late yesterday afternoon. So this morning, first thing, I was in the courthouse advocating for a young woman. And then right after that, not only did I have to change my plans with you because of that, I was supposed to be meeting first thing this morning with an Israeli reporter at that abortion clinic to talk about the changes in the law that have happened in Texas in terms of access to reproductive rights. So that was my today. Tomorrow I'll probably be out registering voters because I do a lot of voter registration. I'm also an election judge. So I you know, on election day, I'll be at some polling place in November, you know, conducting an election.
All right, okay, amazing. What's your plans for the future?
Well, for the future, I tend to keep on doing what I'm doing right now, which is being an activist. Fortunately, I have relatively good health for my age. And, you know, when I was younger, I looked forward to the day that I would be a little old lady in tennis shoes raising hell. And that's who I am today. A little old lady raising hell in tennis shoes most of the time.
All right, okay, amazing. That's all the questions I've got for you today. Thank you so much for coming on here for an interview. It was amazing to be able to talk to you, and it was amazing to be able to meet you at the Aim Higher Gala the other day.
Well, it was fun to be in London. I haven't been in some time. You know, I have, with the pandemic, I haven't done any traveling really. I wish I could have stayed longer because I used to go over to England most every year, and I always enjoyed it. I'd love to go back.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming.
Well, you're breaking up, so I can't really hear what you said.
Sorry. Thank you so much for coming on here for an interview, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day.
Well, thank you. I hope you have a great day too.
Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye.